This has to be one of the most disturbing laws from Jim Crow, where black people were literally not allowed to order coffee from white-owned stores. Let's take it back to the Jim Crow era.
Afternoon, ma'am.
We don't have anything for you here.
Just a cup of coffee, please.
I said we can't serve you. Best you move along.
Now imagine another scenario. The year is 1943 in the Deep South. The war is raging overseas. Black men are fighting in uniform. And yet a black woman steps into a small-town drugstore after a long shift as a domestic worker. Her feet ache. Her hands smell like bleach and starch. All she wants is a cup of hot coffee. Not a meal, not a seat at a table, just coffee. The waitress looks at her, pauses, and says words that had been said so many times they barely needed explaining. "We don't serve coffee to colored." This was not a rumor, it was not folklore, and it was not rare. This was real life. During Jim Crow, black Americans were routinely denied coffee in white establishments across the South, and in many cases, parts of the North as well. There was no single law that read, "Black people may not order coffee," but segregation did not need to spell itself out to be enforced. Coffee was tied to lunch counters, soda fountains, diners, railroad cafés, and drugstores, all of which were among the most rigidly segregated public spaces in America. If you could not sit at the counter, you could not get the coffee. And if you tried anyway, the consequences could range from humiliation to arrest to violence. In Birmingham, Alabama, throughout the 1930s and 1940s, black residents documented being denied coffee at downtown drugstore counters that served white patrons freely. WPA Federal Writers Project interviews collected in Alabama describe black domestic workers and laborers standing at counters while white patrons drank hot coffee inches away, only to be told they could not be served. These interviews make clear that while some black customers were occasionally allowed to purchase packaged goods, coffee was considered off-limits because it required counter service, cups, and direct interaction with white staff. Birmingham area newspapers of the period also recorded arrests tied to lunch counter violations, language that masked the simple act of requesting service. In Mississippi, the rule was often more blunt. Oral histories preserved by the Tougaloo College Civil Rights Archives and the Mississippi Department of Archives and History recount black travelers in Jackson and Delta towns being told they could buy food to go, but not coffee. Coffee required ceramic cups, saucers, and silverware, items white proprietors claimed could not be shared. This belief in contamination was so entrenched that there are documented accounts of cups being discarded if a black person was mistakenly served. Railroad stations offered no refuge. During World War II, black soldiers traveling through Georgia described being denied coffee at station lunchrooms despite holding valid tickets and wearing U.S. Army uniforms. NAACP wartime correspondence and oral histories, later preserved by the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture, record multiple incidents where white soldiers were served hot coffee at counters, while black servicemen were redirected to vending areas without hot beverages. Black newspapers, such as the Atlanta Daily World, reported on these humiliations as part of a broader pattern of segregated wartime travel. South Carolina followed the same pattern. In Columbia and Charleston, black residents recalled a system in which food might be ordered through side windows, but coffee was excluded. University of South Carolina oral histories and civil rights affidavits describe coffee as inside service, reinforcing that the denial was structural rather than incidental. Coffee required sitting, lingering, and being acknowledged as a customer, things Jim Crow was designed to prevent. This is why coffee mattered. White supremacy was obsessed with controlling how black bodies occupied space. Coffee was not just a drink. It symbolized rest, leisure, dignity, and equality. To sit with a cup of coffee was to claim time. To be served coffee was to be acknowledged. Jim Crow could tolerate black labor, but it drew the line at black comfort. There is another layer to this story that rarely gets mentioned. Coffee itself is African. It originated in Ethiopia, where it was consumed communally long before it ever reached Europe or the Americas. From East Africa, coffee moved through trade routes into the Arab world, then into Europe, where it was rebranded, commercialized, and eventually industrialized. By the time Jim Crow segregation was fully entrenched, white-owned businesses in the United States were building wealth off a product with African roots, while denying Black Americans access to it in public spaces. Today's billion-dollar coffee chains are built on that same commodity. The irony is unavoidable. An African-born drink transformed into a white-controlled industry, once used as a tool of exclusion against the very descendants of the continent it came from. In North Carolina, this exclusion was confronted head-on. On February 1st, 1960, 4 Black college students sat down at a Woolworth's lunch counter in Greensboro and politely asked for coffee. They were refused. This refusal is documented in local newspapers, national press coverage, Woolworth's internal records, and later court filings. The act of requesting coffee, something denied to generations before them, became one of the most iconic moments of the civil rights movement. It was mundane, quiet, and revolutionary all at once. The denial of coffee was enforced not just by policy, but by threat. Black patrons who insisted on ordering coffee risked being arrested for disorderly conduct or disturbing the peace. Police records from Alabama and Louisiana show that simply sitting at a counter and requesting service was enough to justify removal. In some cases, white mobs intervened before law enforcement ever arrived, and this practice did not disappear overnight. Even after formal desegregation, many establishments discouraged Black customers from ordering coffee by slowing service, refusing seating, or creating hostile environments. The signs came down, but the message lingered. This history helps explain why cafés, coffee houses, and so-called leisure spaces have long felt unwelcoming to Black patrons. Why lingering has been policed. Why loitering accusations followed Black bodies into modern coffee shops. The denial of coffee was never just about a beverage. It was about who was allowed to rest, who was allowed to belong, and who was allowed to exist comfortably in public. What looks like a small indignity, a cup refused, was part of a larger system designed to remind Black Americans that even the simplest comforts could be taken away. And for many, that memory never left. Scope News tells the truth. Here are the facts. Historical patterns and first-hand accounts referenced in this report draw from WPA Federal Writers Project interviews housed at the Library of Congress, Tougaloo College Civil Rights Archives, the Mississippi Department of Archives and History, Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture Oral Histories, NAACP Wartime Correspondence, Black press reporting including the Atlanta Daily World, and documented newspaper coverage of segregated lunch counters in Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, South Carolina, and North Carolina. The Greensboro Woolworth's refusal of service is supported by contemporaneous local and national newspaper reporting and civil rights records. Legal disclaimer. This content is provided for educational, informational, and historical discussion purposes only. While every effort has been made to present accurate and well-documented historical information based on archived interviews, newspapers, scholarly research, and contemporaneous records, some accounts rely on oral histories reflecting lived experiences under Jim Crow segregation. Viewer discretion is advised, as the subject matter involves racial discrimination, historical trauma, and systemic injustice. This report does not claim to represent every individual experience but highlights verified patterns supported by credible historical sources.